Hello, I'm Harold Munro, Editor-in-Chief at the Vancouver Sun and Province. Joining me is our legislative reporter, Katie DeRosa in Victoria. Good morning, Katie.
Good morning, Harold. And another busy week at the legislature, so lots to talk about.
Yes, well, let's get right to it because I know you've got to run off to other meetings. Last week, of course, the big news was the new rules for short-term rentals. What does this mean for Airbnb and other operators?
The Premier David Eby and Housing Minister Ravi Kahlon last week announced, massive change on the way short-term rentals will be regulated. So basically, banning short-term rentals unless they are in the person's primary residence. So if you own a home and you have a basement suite or a laneway house, one of those is fine, not both. If you own a house and you have 4 condos that are rented out as Airbnb, that is no longer allowed. And so that's the big change that people are grappling with. There are many companies that have, suite of Airbnbs and dozens of listings. I think those are primarily the target of this legislation. So the goal is to move these rentals, these short-term rentals, into the long-term market and put them for rent to long-term tenants. So that's the goal. But whether or not there'll be some sort of loophole or some way that that is thwarted, that's going to be the test of when this legislation passes.
Does Housing Minister Kahlon and his team have any estimates on how many units might go back into the market?
So there was a McGill University study that estimated about 16,000 units are being used, like whole home units are being rented on the short-term market. So again, that's not a part of someone's house. That is entire units that are being rented as short-term rentals. I know Vancouver, for example, their registry shows about 5,000 short-term rentals, but we don't know the breakdown of those. Aren't all whole home short-term rentals. So Minister Kahlon said even if half of those entire homes, even if half of those 16,000 entire homes that are rented out as Airbnb go back on the long-term market, that would make a huge difference in terms of giving people somewhere to live. However, I've heard the argument from people more invested in the short-term rental market that some of these luxury condos aren't going to go on the market for a cheap, affordable rate. They're going to be $4,000 a month unit. So that's sort of the argument that they don't think this is going to make anything more affordable.
Okay. Completely different topic, shifting gears. The province also, well, they brought in legislation last week, I think, forcing Surrey to abandon its efforts to stick with the RCMP and accept the province's push to the Surrey Police Service. Is this fight finally over?
I do not think so. I think
No?
everyone will be over, but there's still the Surrey Mayor Brenda Locke said, well, we're still going ahead with our lawsuit. So there's been no promise to drop the lawsuit. We asked Minister Farnworth last week, does this quash the lawsuit? And he said, well, you have to ask Surrey. That's up to them. So maybe a judge will decide, okay, the legislation means that the lawsuit will not succeed. Certainly, Premier David Eby says he doesn't think the lawsuit will succeed. I mean, he's a lawyer, but obviously he's on one side of the fight. The other lawyer on Surrey's side is Peter German, so quite a well-respected lawyer, respected by David Eby for sure. He is helping Surrey with their legal fight. So, and a big question is whether the $150 million that BC put on the table to sort of sweeten the pot for Surrey to accept the Surrey Police Service, which is going to be more expensive. The question is whether that $150 million is the final offer or whether there's room to increase that to meet some of these increased costs. Premier David Eby last week hinted at, we're willing to sit down with Surrey and discuss that figure, but he didn't necessarily say, we're going to raise it. So that's sort of a question, is whether there's more money to be squeezed out of the province.
Meanwhile, Surrey must be falling further and further behind in terms of hiring police, because you've got, on the one hand, the RCMP in limbo, and then you have the Surrey Police Service in limbo. So how much longer can this go on?
Well, and that's what the premier said. He's like, the longer this goes on, the more the taxpayers have to pay. He's like, there's only one taxpayer. So if Surrey is concerned about things getting more expensive, it should just move to the Surrey Police Service and stop fighting it.
Right.
So the province
Well, and
is
Surrey
saying
would say Surrey, of course, would say the opposite.
exactly. Surrey
Right.
is saying that we will not be dictated by the province, and we should not be forced to do something that's going to cost our taxpayers more money. So I don't think the fight is over, and I don't know if the legislation is going to fix this really awful relationship.
Right. So do you think this legislation, though, is just targeted at Surrey, or do you think there's a bigger picture issue here? Because we know there was a report to the province that recommended a provincial police force to replace the RCMP. Is there a longer term goal here with this legislation?
I think there is. That same committee to reform the Police Act also recommended regional police departments. I mean, there's many police departments in Metro that probably could be, amalgamated. Greater Victoria, for example, has many different police departments for a relatively small area. So if there are communities that amalgamate, for example, in Victoria, Oak Bay Police is a very small police department. If one day Victoria and Oak Bay and Saanich became one police department, they cannot undo that process. So, and same goes for metro municipalities. If they decided to amalgamate, they just can't walk back that process. And so I think that it does solve a larger problem. But again, we don't see any indication that any police departments are going to amalgamate or switch from the RCMP to a municipal force anytime soon. But again, I think the legislation is to have a standard for if that happens down the road. Another another council that's elected can't undo the process, because you could see what a new council is elected if every 4 years and they keep flip-flopping back and forth. That is a lot of uncertainty for people on public safety.
Right. Okay. And one final topic I'd love to touch on here, healthcare being such an important issue and healthcare shortages. We had the provinces agree to bring in a new licensing system that will give health workers the opportunity to work anywhere in Canada. Does this mean that BC could lose some workers to other provinces, but also gain some in the bargain? Like, how is that going to shake out?
Yeah, I asked Minister Dix, I said, does this help us, or does this mean that some of our healthcare workers could be poached to go elsewhere where they would get paid more? Minister Dix said BC typically benefits from these kind of agreements because he cited the last year's agreement with the family doctors that now makes family doctors among the highest paid in Canada. And he's boasted that we have increased our ranks of nurses while other provinces have lost net new nurses. He's also said that more family doctors who graduate from Alberta universities come to BC, as happens vice versa. Fewer BC grads go to Alberta. So Mr. Dix is convinced this will be good for us. But I mean, one has to wonder about some of the poorer provinces, whether they're going to lose healthcare workers. For example, the Atlantic provinces already have a credentialing agreement that means if you are licensed in New Brunswick, you can work in Nova Scotia. So that's kind of going to be the model for the federal government. But again, that is a big question: is it going to help or hurt us? And Minister Dix is convinced that we will gain workers, but at what expense? I mean, we only have so many healthcare workers. I think obviously another big aspect of this is the BC's push to. Last year, it announced that it will have faster credentialing for internationally trained nurses and internationally trained doctors. So that probably is enough time for now those internationally trained doctors might be added to the system. So that would be a good measure as to how many new internationally trained doctors and nurses we're gaining.
Right, because that would actually be a net gain for the country, as opposed to what they're talking about here, which is a zero-sum game. You're going to get provinces competing against each other for the same healthcare pool, which is not necessarily. It's more like a race to the bottom if you start doing that.
Exactly.
But, okay. All right,
and
Katie,
actually,
thanks.
Today the government is announcing an international fast-tracking international credentialing for other professions. So we could see social workers and dentists. So there's a press conference at 10:30. So we'll find out more about that, about more professions that will be able to fast-track through the international credentialing system.
All right. Well, we'll watch for your reporting on that this week and talk about it next week. Thanks, Katie.
Bye-bye.